Thanks, everyone. Thanks for being here. I appreciate your time coming out on a weeknight. It's past my bedtime by the time we finish, so I get it'll be the same for someone here, for people here. So tonight, actually, show of hands. Who came to one of the talks up in Helensvale? Cool, amazing. Thanks for coming again. Haven't scared you off yet. So I guess the cool thing now is that we're going to dive into some behaviours. So that was a lot of foundational stuff. I know some people were kind of snoring and maybe a little bit bored, but this is the exciting stuff. So we've broken this up. We wanted to talk about barking, and we'll talk about why. But I kind of wanted to break this up into two distinct groups. But first, real quick intro for those of you who haven't met me before. I know you're not here to hear about me, but why the hell am I up here? So I'm a vet. I went to UQ vet school back in the day when it was in Brisbane. I graduated in 2006. I moved down the coast in 2007. I've been in small animal medicine since. Some of you may remember the Coast Vet Group. That got bought out by Green Cross. I did my time there. And then I started the Vet Collective, which is a low-stress general practice, and then moved on to open the Vet Behaviour Clinic, which is a behaviour consultancy. So this is what I do. I'm a member of the Australian College of Vet Science, so they're the group in Australia who oversee specialisation and further education, and I'm a resident of the American College, so studying to become a specialist in this stuff. Fear-Free certified. Fear-Free is a group in the States who deal with low-stress animal handling. So if you're looking for vets and groomers and trainers and things like that, Fear-Free or the Pet Professional Guild of Australia are places you can find those people. So these are our sessions. So things that we want to do, understanding canine body language. Hopefully for those of you that were at the last talk, we've got a little bit of a base there. Understanding some behaviour, and there was a bit in that and a bit tonight and in the next talk. And ultimately keeping pets safe, keeping us safe. Pets are not much chop if we're all in hospital from dog bites. So keeping everyone safe, managing some issues. I know from the questions that we got coming through, there's lots of questions about, but my dog does this. And so the fun part is tonight we're going to get into the, but what about? Before we get started, part of why we're here tonight, part of why this talk tonight is called barking, is that some of our dogs make a lot of noise. And some of our neighbours don't like some of our dogs making a lot of noise, and they complain to the city. And so these talks happen, which is a good outcome. Maybe not a good reason. But so just to go through some stats. So recently the state government have changed some legislation around animals and changed some of the penalties. So you'll see the fine down the bottom if your dog's causing a noise nuisance. But what does that mean? It means someone comes out from the city, an authorised person comes out, sits for a period of time, checks it out, and in their opinion, your dog is interfering with the peace and comfort of others. And so they've got some time frames that they work on. But essentially, what we want to do is try to keep our dogs comfy and keep them quiet, look after our neighbours, look after ourselves, and not get fined. The other thing is wildlife conservation. And so we want to make sure that our pets are living their best life and not at the expense of our native wildlife. So there's been some changes again in conservation laws. So the local laws, there's a new requirement in that no matter where we live, we've got to make sure that our dogs don't come in contact with a koala. So we've got to have them on lead or contained on the property. And again, there's a $322 fine if we mess up and that doesn't happen. That doesn't seem enough if your dog attacks a koala. That's bad. But if you live in this designated area, so I know this map is a little bit tiny, but you can scan the QR code in the slides. If you live in one of these purple areas, that's a koala designated zone, and you need to now make sure that you either have koala-friendly fencing, which means they can get out, or exclusion fencing, which means they can't get in. We got some pretty pictures of koala fencing. Cool little dudes climbing. So essentially, we're looking at ways to get them out. So I've got a colour-bond fence, looks great, keeps the neighbour's dog from looking in on me, but the poor old koala can't get out. So we've got ways to get out when they're going to struggle, always to keep them out. So again, colour bond keeps them out of the property. You see the city's fencing where they've got a mesh fence that the koala could normally climb, but we've got a steel barrier at the top so they can't get through. All right, formalities aside, barking and problematic behaviour. So I use that terminology deliberately in that I want to kind of tease out the difference in my mind between what I think is what is healthy and unhealthy versus what is just a problem. And I think a lot of what we see is pretty normal behaviour, but it just isn't desirable. We don't like it. And so today I want to focus on that first bit. So behaviours that are what I would consider a pretty normal doggy behaviour. It's part of their normal behavioural repertoire. The reason behind it seems pretty legitimate, but we might not love it. And barking's a big part of that. And barking's the headliner for tonight. So we'll get to some case studies at the end. But first, I just want to dive through how I think about these things. So, by definition, this is how I think about behaviour. It's the outward expression of their motivation. And then we'll go through these. I know this is a bit wordy, but this is when you spend a lot of time thinking about these things, you end up with lots of words. Outward expression of their motivation, their emotional state, and their level of arousal, influenced by genetics, internal and external environments, and prior learning. So what the hell does that mean? Now, this goes back to what I was saying before. So what is normal behaviour? Now, this is an old friend of mine. I don't have him anymore. This is Jamu. And Jamu had reasonably intense storm phobia. And what you might not notice, now I didn't write this was my wife's doing, but what you can see there is the top of the hole that he chewed at handle height from the living room into the garage. It was as wide as the gap between the two timber uprights, well and truly big enough for him to go through and eat the kitty truffles out of the litter trays that lived in the garage. So not normal, not healthy. But the things I'm thinking about, so species typical or appropriate, I'm thinking about, is that normal? Is that part of what we'd call the ethogram for a dog? Is that a normal dog thing to do? I mean, I think we're ticking no here. Is it adaptive? And by adaptive, I mean, is that making that dog's life better? So when I'm thinking about a behaviour, has that made a change to make their life easier? Are things going to be better moving forward? Again, I don't think so. I don't think the garage was any better than the living room, and he just about electrocuted himself chewing through a PowerPoint. Is it proportional to the context? So what I mean by that is, an example, a dog that doesn't want me to approach, that might, from a distance, be comfortable, and as I approach, it stiffens up, then it growls, then it barks. But if I back, that unwinds and the dog gets comfortable again, as opposed to the dog that the moment it sees me, it's yelling and screaming and lunging and snapping, no matter, and I can back and it's coming with me. So proportional meaning the behaviour flows with what's happening around. One of the things about storm phobia, one of the definitions of phobia is that it's an emotional response that's disproportionate to what's happening. So some of you will know there's the tiniest little rumble of thunder. It's 80 kilometres away, this tiny little rumble, and the dog is 100% petrified. It's not proportional. And then logical. What is that motivation? I mean, maybe he's trying to get away, but, it doesn't make sense. So these are the things where I go, is a behaviour normal? The flip side of that is my dog that's playing in the backyard with my other dog. They're having a great time. He's barking at her. Barking, species typical, completely adaptive if they're communicating. Proportional to context, yeah, he barks when she does something, but then she lays down and it stops for a bit, then he barks again. Logical, yeah, it's a communication process. So completely normal, completely healthy behaviour. Is it a problem? Is it undesirable? Maybe. It's my problem, right? So that's what I want to look at here. What's normal, what's undesirable? But from back to these definitions. Now I want to dive through. Motivation. So motivation is the animal's why. It's their concept of what am I trying to get or avoid from this situation. So often it's just obtaining basic needs. So, motivation is to get access to another social individual, get access to food or water. Dogs in our houses now get access to a toy. That's a motivation. Safety, comfort, desired resources, sometimes to hold them. Everyone hears about resource guarding. So, I've got my toy now and I'm going to growl at my sister so that she can't get it. This is motivation. Then I'm talking about getting things. It can also be to avoid. So motivation can be to avoid interaction with an item or an individual that they don't want anything to do with. Next is motivation. And now I'm going to skim through this pretty quickly because the next set of talks that we're going to do is going to focus on those unhealthy, abnormal behaviours. So the Jammus of this world that are chewing holes through the drywall. And so, of course, we're going to dive into emotions there. But I'm thinking about this broadly, thinking about positive and negative valenced emotions. Am I feeling good? Am I feeling bad? Is that influencing what you're doing? There's a guy, a neuroscientist named Jaak Panksepp. He was an Estonian American, and he developed this term, affective neuroscience, where he looked at the neurology behind emotional states. And he came up with these 7 emotional systems, which seeking, rage, fear, lust, care, grief, play. And now in the veterinary behaviour world, we kind of adapt those into our pets. Largely speaking, thinking positive, negative, how's that affecting behaviour? Arousal, same preface. There's lots of this in the next one, but I think of arousal the way I think of the volume knob on our radio. So if emotion is positive and negative valence, like your favourite music and your least favourite music, the volume is your arousal. So you can have music that you like, but if it's at 11 out of 10, it still kind of sucks, right? Or after a bit it does. And certainly if, someone hops in the car and puts on their favourite country music, then 11's not going to be fun for very long. So I think arousal matters, and I think now more and more I see dogs where their behaviour is undesirable, largely thanks to their level of arousal and their inability to deal with it. But we'll dive into that more in the next set of talks. Genetics, I think it's important that we pay homage to the fact that a lot of these animals, they've evolved over thousands of years, but selectively we've bred dogs to do some specific things too. Some of them we've bred to do things that involve barking, chasing, nipping, and then we take them to the dog park and they round up other dogs and we go, hang on, I don't want you to do that. So I think, not that we can't change behaviour, but I think we just need to pay some respect. So as a species, as a breed or a group, and there's a bit of controversy around how much behaviour follows a breed. Is there more diversity within a breed than in between them? But I think certainly groups, right? We can look at a dog and go, you really are a border collie. Like, you're truly a working dog, or you truly are a Jack Russell Terrier. We all know what that means. I see people smiling and nodding. Then the individual, mum and dad make the pups. We absolutely know that, a mum or a dad that's super anxious or super driven in a certain way, that will affect the pups and have a flow-on effect. And then epigenetics is how we transcribe our DNA. And so that comes into play, particularly for mums when they're pregnant with a litter of pups. If things are really scary, things are really stressful, we can give birth to a litter of pups that are really, really keyed up to be anxious and to be vigilant and to worry about things. And so there's lots of studies in rats and people and some in dogs that shows that stuff. You come out of mum, she's been in an environment that's that's not super comfortable, and you come out ready to go. Internal environment. Now, this was the least offensive anatomical photo that I thought I could put up here. It's not that I think you all want cartoon anatomy, but I didn't want any real life things. Again, this will play more into next week's lectures, is that physiological, there are some hormonal disturbances that can really play into behaviour. And physical, the big ones, pain. I mean, who hasn't had a chronic pain, a headache for 5 days or a sore back for a week, and you get snappy, someone says something that they could have said last week and got away with, and you bite their head off, and later on you think, oh, why did I do it? It happens all the time in dogs, right? They got a toothache right up the back that no one can see. They've got a partially bulging disc. They got a bung knee. We take them down the dog park, and there's a 18-month-old Jack Russell Terrier jumping up and having the best time of his life, and you're like, bugger off, So this matters, and we'll dive into some more. External environment. We'll spend lots of time here tonight. So modifying the external environment, the world around our dogs, we can do a whole lot of good for them. We can protect them from feeling crummy, from emotional trauma when it's really intense. But we can also protect ourselves from rehearsal, because every time an animal displays a behaviour of any type, those neural circuits get stronger. So I once had a neurologist describe circuitry like a walking track through the bush. And so initially, a circuit looks like when you look off the track and you're just looking at scrub and there's nothing to see. And then, one person walks through there and you can kind of see they've snapped a stick here and there's one footprint. And the more times that behaviour happens, the closer it gets to a well-worn path, and the more likely it is that that path gets used again in the future. So we get this neural change where behaviours are more likely, but also then there's the potential for reinforcement. We're going to talk about reinforcement and in learning in a moment, but by modifying the environment, we can reduce the context, we can change the context in which behaviours happen and reduce the likelihood of accidental reinforcement. So yeah, we're going to spend some time here. And finally, learning history. What's happened before? What's happened that's caused me to do something, and then what's come from that? Am I the dog, the cute little puppy that comes home? I'm an 8-kilo Mastiff puppy, and I'm little and floppy and cute and all jowls, and I jump up on everyone and I reach their top of their shins, and it's really cute because they're 8 kilos and they're little. That means I don't have to bend down quite as far. And then they're 65 kilos, right? So reinforcement, that 8-kilo puppy did all the things. One day he came up and he said, hey, you're kind of ignoring me while I've got 4 feet on the floor, so I'm just going to jump up and say g'day. And the person said, oh, you adorable, hi. And you gave him a pat and you talked to him. Maybe you grabbed him a treat and he was like, heck, this is good. I'm going to keep doing this. And then it worked and it worked and it worked and it worked. And one day at about 25 kilos, you went, that's really bad. And the poor little guy's like, hang on a minute, what just changed here? Punishment. The thing that can happen with learning history and punishment is that while in theory punishment will mean a behaviour happens less and less, it can also come with some pretty significant downsides. And I've got a slide specifically about the potential impact of punishment. But we can really harm the bond that we have with a dog if we're deliberately trying to punish them, particularly if we're failing and the behaviour is continuing and we're just doing it anyway. So we can really do some emotional damage. So, yabba, 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 what about the barking? So the question then is, what do we do about the behaviour? And so, do we treat the behaviour? And my question for you guys is, let's talk about barking, because that's the moral of the story for tonight. I got 4 dogs for you. One is Jamu. He's just chewed through into the garage. He's now in the garage. He realises life is no better. and he starts barking. I have a dog that's barking at, and I promise, I wrote this before a recent conversation with someone, barking at someone that's trying to break into the house. I've got another dog that's barking at the postie who's driving his super quiet and I think even more annoying electric trike past the house. And then I've got a dog that's home alone, has separation anxiety and is sitting at the front door howling. All 4 dogs are barking. Do we think that we do the same thing for all 4 dogs? No. Cool, I'm seeing some shaking. No, we don't. Because, and look, I guess coming at it from a punishment model, some people may, here's the behaviour, I want to stop it. But my concern is, out of these dogs, and we could list another million other things, right, that cause dogs to bark, because it's common, it's potentially normal. The little guy that's barking at the postie, maybe he's having a good time, but maybe not. And the other ones certainly aren't. Storm phobia, an intruder in the house, separation anxiety, they're having a pretty rough time, and they're barking as a consequence of that. And if we then go ahead and start trying to punish them for their barking, we're going to make them feel a whole lot worse. And you'll see in a moment, by addressing the underlying concerns, we can make them feel a whole lot better and remedy the situation in a more humane way. So how do we assess these things? So I think about these 3 main, or these 4 kind of subtitles, which essentially cover over the things we've just talked about: motivation, emotion, arousal, genetics, environment, learning. And so each time I see a behaviour, I think, okay, cool. First of all, what are you doing? What is the behaviour? I want to describe it. I don't want, I won't shut up. That doesn't describe anything, I want, when someone knocks at the door, he runs from his bed to the front door, jumps up, scratches the door, barks. Cool. Now we've got a pretty good idea of what he's doing. The context, I've already jumped into that a little bit. It's when someone comes and knocks on the front door of the house. Emotion, and today we're going to focus more on dogs that are emotionally doing pretty well, right? Next time we're going to talk about things where I think emotions are a little bit out of whack and we need some help there. But today we're going to focus more on, hey, you feel pretty okay, but you're just doing things that I don't love. Motivation, what are you aiming to get out of it? And then traits are some of those other things like genetics, underlying health, and learning history. So treatment plan, when I think about a treatment plan, well, vets are taught to kind of think of what are called the 3 M's: modification, management, medication. I think about these in terms of behaviour modification. We should always be doing. We should always be teaching our pets how we want them to live and act in the world, right? We should be guiding them because we're the ones that brought them into this situation and we should be giving them that information. Management, we should be doing as we need to protect them and prevent unwanted rehearsal of undesirable behaviours. And then medication, yeah, sometimes. Again, we're not going to dive into that too much today, but we'll talk about it a little bit in the next talk. And I know that's not necessarily why people are here, so I don't want to harp on about that. But next talk, we'll talk about what I want when I think about meds, what I want them to do, what I don't want them to do, and what they kind of can't do. I think there's some concerns about them doing things that they don't really do. So we're going to shuffle this list up a little bit just because and start with management. So this is an image I ripped off the internet, but I was lucky enough a couple of years ago to travel and work a little bit with some of the Special Forces dogs that kind of kick around a little bit like this at times. And so management-wise, this makes me think about doing a good job. This dog's obviously exposed to some pretty significant things. I've been watching some military videos about working males and, jumping out of planes and rappelling out of choppers and things. And so we're protecting eyes, we're protecting ears. This boy or girl's got a vest on. But for our dogs, I'm thinking about management to prevent sensitization, so preventing their concern about these stimuli and their reaction to these stimuli increasing over time, preventing further trauma, because I think some of the things that we expose our dogs to are traumatic. And then, like I said before, rehearsal. So strengthening of that neural circuitry and accidental reinforcement. And then behaviour modification, or if you want to be one of the cool training kids, you call it BMOD. Kind of splits into two sections. These two things happen together all the time. So every individual dog is learning every moment of its life, just like we are. Every moment we're taking in information, we're assessing it, we're kind of deciding what to do next. So are our pets. We think about these classical and operant conditioning systems as two sort of separate systems, but they are inseparable in a way. So it's important to remember that they're happening together. Classical conditioning, we will talk about lots in the next talk. It's what we use to try to imprint positive emotional responses onto stimuli that currently elicit negative emotional responses. So we can pair two stimuli, one of them that elicits an overtly positive response. So often we use food, we use toys, we use praise, anything that our dogs like, and we pair that with something they don't like, and we can truly imprint that emotional response. But today what I want to talk about more is operant conditioning. So that's how our little rodent friend here learning that if he presses that buzzer when the light's green, out comes some snacks. That's the same thing that teaches our doggos that, when the human says sit and I put my butt on the floor, the treats come at me. And that's because today we're talking about behaviours that aren't motivated by or based in negative emotion. We're going to skip over the classical conditioning and talk about, hey, let's teach them something new. This was in my last talk, so I'll go over it pretty quickly, but I think whenever we're talking about teaching our pets something, whenever we're talking about learning, it's our responsibility to do it in the most ethical way we possibly can. And so that's to say, making sure that they're as healthy as they can be. We set up their environment. So antecedent arrangements, that's their environment. So setting up for a training session so that they succeed, and then using positive reinforcement before we ever contemplate anything else. We know from the research, the scientific literature tells us that positive reinforcement can and will give us as good or better results than any of the other modalities without the risk. And in fact, the use of punishment has a whole bunch of potential negatives, which we'll get into, and actually balancing them and using them all together can result in more aggressive behaviours than using punishment alone. So yeah, don't fall into the trap of thinking, oh cool, I'll use all of them and I'll get the best results. No, we're better off sticking with positive reinforcement and just teaching your dog exactly what we want out of them in these individual contexts. So for those of you that weren't at the last talk, I'll fly through this, but these are the 4 quadrants of operant conditioning. So these are how we teach animals, or these are the things that occur that promote or decline the future occurrence of a behaviour. So by definition, reinforcer is something that means a behaviour will happen more. A punisher is something that means a behaviour will happen less. Positive means we're adding something, negative means we're subtracting. This makes it easier. Positive reinforcement. This lovely looking gentleman is adding something positive in the form of a snack with the hope that the dog will sit more often when he's told. Positive punishment, we're adding something, I was going to say negative, adding something aversive that the dog doesn't like in the hope that it doesn't do whatever it's doing wrong. Don't ask me what it's doing wrong. Negative reinforcement is removing something unpleasant so that the behaviour happens more. So taking off the leash, dog's free, good boy. It should learn to do whatever happened immediately prior to that. And then unfortunately for this dog, he must love his rug, because negative punishment is removing something desired to punish a behaviour and have it happen less. So that's the theory behind operant conditioning. The risk of punishment is, in the most serious form, injury and trauma. Absolutely, we can damage the bond. But at best, we're suppressing a specific behaviour, which means we don't actually teach that dog what we want. We're saying, don't do that, don't do that, don't do that, which is really not overly informing. That individual's going to be sitting there thinking, okay, yeah, well, we'll do what? And we're leaving that vacuum there for them to decide, which I think is a really bad idea. If you go back to my very first slide, and I got in trouble for teasing my Cocker Spaniel Andrew too much in the first talk, but if I gave him the choice every time, life would be really bad. And so with positive reinforcement, I can say, hey, if you do this, good things will happen. And he goes, yeah, cool, I'm going to do that then, rather than saying, don't do that. And he goes, cool, I'm going to do this. Oh, no, don't do that. I'm going to go do this. That would be all bad decisions. So yeah, we can direct their learning. Equipment, we'll talk about equipment when we get to the case studies. And then I just wanted to mention again, we're going to dive into some BMOD, some behaviour modification. If you need help, reach out, look for Fear Free, look for the Pet Professional Guild. They're going to be positive reinforcement trainers. They should make this stuff fun for you and for your dog. It should be something you enjoy doing. I know a lot of you probably didn't end up here and didn't come to learn about training because one day you woke up and thought, I'm going to get a dog because I love dog training. You think, I'm going to get a dog because I want to go for long walks on the beach or snuggle on the couch, and then you bring home this gremlin that ruins your life, right? Yeah, trauma. But it can be fun. It really can be fun, and it really can strengthen the bond between you and your dog, and yeah. So as long as you're working with the right people. A couple little terminologies that we'll get to. The top one's desensitization and counter conditioning. So desensitization is reducing a reaction to a specific stimulus, environmental stimulus, by repeated exposure, but below a threshold that they respond. So that's the important bit, right? Is we've had lots of great questions. My dog is on lead, and don't worry, we'll get to some on lead reactivity. And whenever he sees a dog, he's like on the end of the lead and lunging and barking and snarling and drooling, and he looks like a ferocious beast. And but I keep exposing him to all these dogs and he's not getting better. The threshold is the key there. So we need to expose them below that threshold. And now that can be tricky, right? I know dogs that they can see a dog at 400 meters and they're doing that same thing. So it can be really tricky, but there are ways to navigate that. Counter conditioning is then teaching them a new thing to do or way to feel. And that all comes back to that slide about classical conditioning or operant conditioning. Operant conditioning, let's teach them something new. Let's teach them at home. Let's make it fun. Let's condition it. Let's get it strong and quick, and then take it out on the road. Classical conditioning, more thinking about let's teach that new positive emotional association. Differential reinforcement comes into the operant bit. So that's what are we going to teach them? So an alternative behaviour. So, hey, instead of doing that, how about you do this? Incompatible is where we say, hey, instead of doing that, what if you do something that means you can't do it? For instance, the dog that jumps up on me. We start teaching it to sit. Hey, if you want to interact with the person, you 65 kilo beast, walk up, grab a seat, and I'll smother you in kisses. I'll give you, if you want them, ask permission. I'll give you some treats, So then the sitting dog isn't the jumping dog. And of course we can go from sitting to jumping, but that's incompatible. And then essentially, what can we teach? But I wanted to get to this stuff. This is the exciting bit. This is the stuff that I think everyone comes for, right? So I've got 4 case studies with some kind of subgroups. And then we've got some questions to get through, so we can try to dive in and group some of these into buckets, the similar ones, and try to get some answers for individual people who are here. But so case study 1, barking. And now I'm using that openly, deliberately. We just talked about, cool, we're not going to treat the barking, but I want to talk about a few different scenarios and how would we address them. So let's say, number 1, I've got a dog in the backyard playing with its mate, and it barks a lot. And this was a question that came through online to us is that, I've got a dog and when it plays, it's super vocal. So it's barking a lot. What do I do about it? I mean, I don't want to stop the dog barking. So, let's run through these things. So the motivation, I would imagine, is communicating with the other dog that it's playing with. That's completely normal. I mean, there's a range there. There's going to be excessive and not, but that's a normal behaviour. Emotion, they're playing. They're having a good time. So there's nothing for us to do there. Arousal, as long as that's kind of going up and down. The dog's playing. They're going to get excited. Occasionally, like kids playing, someone's going to get poked in the eye and there'll be a few tears. But as long as it's up and down like a roller coaster, okay? I think it should scale up and down arousal, not up and up and up and up and up. And that's what I see in some of the dogs that struggle with that arousal. Genetics and internal environment we'll leave for now, but external environment. So here's this little dog. They're in the backyard. They're playing, and we're barking a lot in play. What I'm interested here in external environment, is what specifically is happening during that play sequence that ends up in that dog barking. Because what I don't want to do is take away play from that dog. But there might be specific things that we can modify in that play sequence that help. Learning history. Obviously, this dog, these people have written in and said, "Hey, it's happening." They've gotten to the point where they're coming to these things and they're talking to us. So it's been happening for a while, and so that dog thinks that works, right? So learning history. There's been a fair bit of reinforcement, not necessarily from the owners. They're not out there with their treat pouch every time the dog's barking, telling it that it's a good dog. But it can be reinforced by the other dog. And some of these things can be self-reinforcing. So if you're having a good time when you do something, that can be reinforced by innate reinforcers and motivation. So then what I'm thinking, coming back to that treatment plan, environmental management, what are we going to change? And behaviour modification. So knowing that we can get in trouble, let's say that person has a neighbour that's, complained to the city, and we've gotten to the point where we've got a notice in the mail, and it's really pretty serious, and we think, hey, we've got to lock this down. All right, let's be extreme in terms of the management, and let's say, cool, let's let those dogs play inside. Let's take them down to the local park and make it someone else's problem. Let's not have it happen in the backyard. The next step might be, and I was talking about what are the specific contingencies about that play. Does it only happen when they play with specific toys? Or, can I change that play in a way that changes the behaviour? My goal with management, environmental management, is ideally to set up a different scenario where that behaviour doesn't happen, the dog does something different, and I can reinforce that. So for that dog that might have been playing really appropriately, running around the other dog, let's say it's a heeler, it's running laps around this other dog that's doing its own thing, and it's yapping, bop, 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 bop. And I get it, that can get annoying for the neighbours. But, what can I change in that setting? Can I engage the other dog? Can I engage that dog? And instead, by playing with that dog, all of a sudden it's out there, it's playing, it's having a good time, and it's not barking. And I can reinforce that. Play is reinforcing. So we keep playing, or I take some treats. If it starts barking, we kind of, try to manage away from that. Wait for it to be quiet, reinforce that. So using the management to set our dogs up so that they're likely to do the thing that we want. That's I guess, the message for management. Pardon me. The other thing then, in terms of behaviour modification, so what specific kind of skills or tricks, for lack of a better word, could we teach that dog to help? Here's our little Jack Russell friend running around in the backyard having a good time, singing its song to the people. Can I teach that dog instead? And actually, Andy, in our first slide, would run out into the backyard. So he's a Cocker Spaniel. He's a working line Cocker Spaniel. So he's been bred to flush dogs for people who like to shoot birds. He loves chasing birds, and I don't blame him. That's what he's been made for. And so if there are birds in the backyard, he will go mental. So I've taught him that when I let him off the back deck, I will throw one of his toys off the deck into the yard, and he goes hell for leather, grabs that toy, and it does two things. One, it gives the birds a really good warning that Andy's coming, so they get the hell out of the way and it makes my life better. And two, if he gets close enough that he gets overstimulated and decides to yell, he's got a big squishy toy in his mouth. So instead we get this like, whoa, and the neighbours will be way happier about it. I'm happier about it. So there are things that we can do. Can we teach this healer, to play tug? So it's got something in its mouth. Can it play fetch? Can we just change that situation to make the behaviour different and then reinforce the new one? The second one I had on my list was birds. And so, I kind of got into that talking about Andy already, but management. Okay, can I get rid of the birds? So maybe. Sometimes I'll get up and the backyard's full of birds. So I shut Andy in the kitchen and I go out the other door and I walk through the yard and the birds all bugger off. And then I go and get Andy and I let him out. Yeah, it's a pain in the butt at 5 a.m, and I haven't had my first coffee, but it means he doesn't do it. And not only does it, I think often people think you did all that to stop him barking one time. But again, it's about that practice. And if I commit and I do that really consistently for a month, and I think a month for some dogs, if you're lucky, that'll make a big difference. Some dogs it's longer, but if I commit and I go, cool, hey buddy, I promise you, when you run down in there, you don't have to worry, there are not going to be birds. All of a sudden he runs down there and he's looking for his toy, he's not looking for birds. Where back in the day he would run down and he'd be scanning and he'd be looking up in the sky. So management isn't just about, I'm going to buy myself one reprieve this morning. It's about a commitment to changing the environment so that they exhibit different behaviours. And then, again, like Andy, we can reinforce them. Play is reinforcing. That interaction is reinforcing. Birds. Let's say I can't move them out of the backyard. Let's say I live on 10 acres. Can I create a space at 5 a.m. in the morning where I can let him where there aren't birds? Can I take him out a side door on lead, let him go to the toilet, and then let him chase the birds at 10 a.m. when none of the neighbours care? Can I modify life to make that behaviour less problematic, right? For what is a pretty normal behaviour. We've bred that dog over the last 200 years to run at birds and yell at them. And so it's my job now, living in the suburbs, to make that environment change for him. Then the postie. I thought we'd maybe talk about barking at the postie. That's one, we'll probably find a couple of them. And let's include in there pedestrians, so, people walking past, people with a pram, people with a dog, people with, school kids. What I want to say is, for now, let's assume that their emotional state is positive, because that will change what we do here, and we'll dive into the other end of that spectrum in the next talk. But so their motivation is that they're communicating. They're having a reasonably good time of some description. There might be some frustration. There might be this happy little guy running around in his yard and kind of thinking, well, you guys are out there and I'm stuck in here. So then I'm going to not worry about emotion. I'm not going to worry about an internal environment. I'm thinking, how can I modify this environment, this external environment, to make this behaviour less likely? So can we reduce this little guy, and I was going to pull myself up because I somehow call all the dogs Guy, but they're clearly a boy. Can I reduce his awareness of those things? So can I block his visual access? Can I reduce his auditory awareness so I can't change the noise that the people make, for better or worse? I probably can't, so I have had people use, hearing protection, earmuffs, that kind of thing, but, that can be hard work. But I can put this little dude somewhere in his bed with a speaker that means he's less aware of those noises. So modifying the environment, bit of background noise, all of a sudden he doesn't hear the postie. I put a bit of, core flute or bamboo or hessian or something, all of a sudden, even if it's not the whole fence, from where he likes to hang out in his bed, now he can't hear the postie, he can't see the postie. So is he that much less likely to engage in the behaviour? And I can then reinforce him for doing something completely different. Does that make sense, how we can modify that and we can change the world to change the behaviour, and then we get the opportunity to do something different with him? And in terms of the behaviour mod, so what would I teach him? Again, we don't need to think too much about emotion for this little guy, but I'm thinking about, at first, let's teach him to come and hang out at the back of the house. I'm reducing that awareness. I'm taking him away from the trigger. He's going to help me manage the environment. I can then, if I want to get stuck into some training, I can start teaching him some reps where we walk up to the fence when we see someone, and I might put him on lead to do this initially. When we see someone coming, then we move away, and as we move away, I reward him, and he learns, when I see someone walking along the fence line, and I look to my person, and we move away, good stuff happens. And we can transition that to a point where we're doing it off lead, and he's doing it by himself, and I'm here calling him, and all of a sudden we get a dog that sees the people coming and comes looking for you to be like, hey, there's people out on the street, you owe me a snack. And that can truly happen. We can make those kind of differences change. I think the important part in a sequence like that is that we need to understand where he can start that learning process. So we wouldn't start at the fence line, off lead, because we know what that looks like already. That's the problem that got us here, And so I'm not just going to go, okay, I'm going to leave it as it is, but I'm going to come and I'm going to hope it's better. And, if it's not better, I might yell at you. And if it's, then I'll give you a snack or, it's just mayhem. What I want to do is set up a way that I know that it won't happen, and then I can pay him for doing what I want him to do. All right, barking. I'm sure we'll get to some more barking, but they were the examples that I had given. Barking can be difficult in terms of, I used the analogy before about the Mastiff learning to jump up and, then eventually that becoming a bad idea because it's a giant breed dog and it's knocking grandma over. And we can teach that dog to do something else. Grandma comes in the door, go lay on your mat. We condition a positive emotional response with a mat in the corner, and hey, if you hang out on that mat, good things are going to happen. So, or like I said before, come up and sit, and Granny will give you a scratch and a treat, and everything will be good. The hard part with barking is there aren't many things that we can teach them to do that then mean they can't bark. So I talked about Andy, holding a toy. That can be good. He can still bark, but it's significantly muted. It's pretty difficult, and I would say beyond my means as a dog trainer, to teach a dog to keep its mouth closed. It's there might be some trainers in this room who are up to the task, but I'm not. So that's where for me managing that environment is really important. Pulling on lead. Who's had a dog that likes to pull on their lead? I know there's some of you there. So I think I wanted to divide this into two dogs. One is pulling on their lead all the time. So I walk out the front gate, maybe I don't even get to the front gate, and my shoulder's out of its socket, and it remains that way for the entire walk until I get home and let go. Versus the animal that walks pretty well, everything's good, then sees a thing, another dog. Yep. Dog, if you're a Cocker Spaniel, it's a bird. It might be an electric scooter. It might be a motorbike. It might be, anything. So I think what we're talking about for the dog that pulls the whole time is what I would carefully call leash manners. And I say carefully because I think saying manners is assuming that dogs should come out of their mother with an understanding of what a leash and a harness are and how they work and what the humans want from them. They have no idea, right? And so that dog, my 8-kilo Mastiff puppy friend gets its first collar, and it's cute because it's little and it'll grow out of it in a week. And it gets a lead and we go, hey, this will be fun. Let's go for our first walk. And we step out the gate and the dog goes, I want to go there. What would we expect it to do, right? It pulls to the end of the lead, and if it's not quite there, it pulls a little bit harder. And it's 8 kilos and it's super bloody cute. And so you go, yeah, okay, come on, that's good. Yep. Oh, I want to go over there. Okay. Learning history, reinforcement, right? So that's not to say we want to be yanking our puppies around the place, but it's a completely normal expectation that a dog's going to want to go where it wants to go, and that if we teach it that, hey, when you pull me in a direction, we go there, hey, that's what I'm going to keep doing. So what I would like is instead, again, rather than, we talked about the goal of punishment being to suppress a behaviour. So at best we go, don't do that. But we kind of don't say, instead do this. What I want to say is, hey, if you walk like here, I'll make it worth your while. That'll be really good for me. And so in turn, I'll make it really good for you. So the simple concept I have people play around with is draw an imaginary circle as big as you would like it to be. If you are training this dog to be in the movies or you're both going to join the army, cool. That can be the tightest little circle that those 4 paws can fit in. Or if you're like me and you've got a crazy Cocker Spaniel and you're just happy to have a located shoulder, it's kind of big. It's as long as the lead. And so I start walking, and when he's there, I tell him he's a good boy and I drop him a treat. And when he gets to the end of the lead, I stop and I hang. And at some point, he gets bored of going that way because he's not getting anywhere. And he comes back and I go, yeah, that's good. And we go this way. And then he gets to the end of the lead over here and we stop. And now this gets really boring really quick, but they learn it really quick, right? So your training is teaching them, hey, when I'm in this circuit, we still get places. Like my walk is still good. I still get sniffs. Like sure, I don't get to direct the whole thing, but I get to check out all the cool stuff, and I'm getting treats the whole time. This is really kind of cool. So I'm just going to spend more time here. Now, it doesn't mean that they never pull on a lead, and I kind of feel like that's an unrealistic expectation, right? Like, I mean, if we have reasons, if we've got people that are on a walker, we can work harder on that. But I think for most of us, we say, cool, you get to the end of the lead, I'll stop. You come back, I'll pay you. The hard part is then, okay, yeah, what about my dog pulls on the lead all the time right now? How do I get there? And I need to walk him. I've got a border collie, and so I exercise him 7 hours a week, right? I can't do this 7 hours a week, right, and cover a 4-meter spot. Then comes in environmental management. The fun part about dogs is that they're crazy smart, and sometimes they're too smart, but sometimes it helps. And so border collies can learn things like, when I put you on this front clip harness, and now I had that equipment slide that I glossed over pretty quickly, but the thing I like about front clip harnesses is that they're safe, they're comfy, everything's fine, but if I do pull on them, I kind of get turned, so it's like a little bit harder for me to kind of drag you along, to the dead cane toad that's sitting in the gutter, who hasn't fished a cane toad out of their dog's mouth on a walk. And so I clip him up on this front clip. I go and, sorry, let me take a couple of steps back. We've been walking for 3 years on a flat collar and a lead, and it's going bad. That's why we're here. He's pulling everywhere I go. I'm sick of it. I go and get a new piece of equipment. I get a harness, I get a maybe a halter, I get something different and I say, cool, whenever we're on this, we're in training mode. I'm going to take you for a run on your old equipment. We're going to go for an hour. When we come home, I'm going to take you for a 5-minute training session where you get to the end of the lead, I stop, we come back, treat, wait, and we're in training mode, and that dog's going to learn that piece of equipment. I walk here, good things happen. And maybe it doesn't transfer. Maybe the old piece of equipment forever remains the thing I pull on. But I actually think at some point you're going to notice it transfers across. But that's the amazing thing where we can modify that environment and go, hey, under these specific circumstances, if you do this, this positive outcome comes along. And so, yeah, I think leash training like that from foundation for people who are getting a new puppy or doing it the way I just mentioned for people who already have a dog that's pulling is a game changer, and it happens quick. I did it with Andy. I am ashamed to say I walked him out the front door like my Mastiff friend and went, yeah, be good, And he wasn't. He was a nutbag. And then at some point in time later, I was like, come on, you're meant to be the intelligent one in this relationship. Do something about it. Sometimes I wonder. Then the dog that is walking fine, sees the thing, and starts pulling. We can use the same approach. If we're talking about normal emotion, normal internal environment, and a motivation that's like, hey, there's another dog. I just want to get over there and say, hey, this will change and we will do it again if there's my arch nemesis and I want to kill them. Different story. I want to change emotion in that setting. But in this scenario, I think it's totally fine. If they're happy and they just want to get over there, they're pulling on lead, we stop and we go, no, that's not how this works, right? You can pull, and at some point they're going to give up, right? And at that point, we reward them and we keep moving. It can be really useful thinking about behavior modification. That is a learning moment. But the benefit of training something back at home is that we can condition a skill, we can teach a skill, we can condition it strongly so that it turns onto autopilot. And I often use the analogy I have of military precision. And so, they drill in the military, and I have no military background, so I might be completely rubbish here, but, they teach people to operate, and they practice and they practice and they practice. So when the proverbial hits the fan and things are scary, you go onto autopilot and you can be mechanical and you can operate. And that's what I want to do with our dogs in certain situations. So is to teach them, let's say the dog that sees another dog and is pulling along, to teach them a cue that says, hey, we're changing directions here. And you're going that way, we're going to go that way, and it's going to be good. Like, it's going to be fun. And we start that in the kitchen, and then we progress into the backyard and the front yard, and we practice in the front yard as there are dogs walking past. And then we take it out on the road, and by that point, we see the dog, we start to pull, but we've already got the conditioning in there that this dog knows, hey, when you say this, when you say do a U-E, U-turn, whatever we call it, it knows, hey, this is going to be fun. I'm going to get something out of this, and off we go. So conditioning, not only in that moment, teaching that kind of let's wait it out, but also teaching something prior can make a significant difference. Jumping. There we go. This is a nice picture as not a Mastiff, but so we've already talked about this a little bit. Often I get this, is a normal motivation. It's a dog that jumps up and gets to taste what you've had for breakfast. It gets cuddles, it enjoys it. It's normal emotion. This is a pretty comfortable looking dog. I don't think it's doing any harm here. And what I would say is if you're totally cool with that, great. But if it's an undesirable behavior, if you can do this, but then it's knocking over, your nephew and niece and maybe granny again, then we need to do something about it. And so that's where we're teaching, we change the environment so that it can't happen. So, the extreme of that might be, hey, grandma comes over and we crate train that dog. And crate train to me means we're not locking it in a prison cell. It's not getting sent to its room for punishment. We condition a positive association that crate's a cool place to be. It gets a bone, it gets chucked in its crate. Granny's there, that's simple. It fixes the problem. Or, more interactive than that, we can teach your dog to go and sit on a mat, and if you stay on your mat, good things will happen. And then when you come up to interact, like we said before, you pull a sit, you drop into a down, then you get interaction. Everyone stays calm so that we don't arouse up. But I'll click through that because I've been talking about that all night. One more very normal behaviour that no doubt gives people the irrits is digging. So, there's not much that's more normal for a dog to do, right? And thinking about learning history, it's probably dug in there one time, it smelled something, you went and put chook poo all over the lawn and, or it found a worm, it's naturally reinforcing because it's a natural, normal canine behaviour, and they do it, and then one day they find something cool in there. Game over. Then we're digging all around the place. And now again, I think there are dogs that are digging because they're distressed. I think there are dogs that are digging for unhealthy reasons. But again, to say normal behaviour, what can we do about it? So the best advice and the most successful advice I find is that for the dogs that really like to dig, give them somewhere to dig. And so, create them a sand pit, buy a pool shell, fill it with sand. And, if this is doable, I know it can be messy, bury treats in there. Because if the lawn, 1 time out of 10 pays out with an earthworm, but the blue kiddie pool full of sand every time pays out a dozen liver treats, guess where I'm going to go and dig? So we can kind of manage and reinforce that. Well, that's kind of behaviour mod, right? We're teaching that dog, we're reinforcing that dog for digging in the sandpit. Then we can go back and do what I think is more commonly understood, whack some mesh across the chicken mesh across the lawn or something so that we're allowing some grass to grow. But again, how can we manage that environment, reduce access to this piece of lawn, cover it over, whatever that means, and promote something that we like so that dog can do something normal, get the benefit out of it, we're meeting its needs, and everybody wins. So they're my 4 case studies into normal but unwanted behaviours. And so so the things I wanted to take away from today is, what is a behaviour? It's not just a single thing that the dog does to irritate you or get you in trouble with the neighbours. It's a outward expression of a whole bunch of stuff that's going on inside that dog at the time and previously. There's a whole bunch of components. And thinking about behaviour change, specifically thinking about today, what I want to do is manage that environment so that I can create a situation in which that behaviour isn't going to happen. And we'll dive into some of these questions and try to apply this same logic. Then when that's not happening, either wait for a behaviour that we like and capture it, so we just reinforce it when it happens, or we teach the behaviour in advance, cue it and reinforce it. So that's all for today. That's Jamu, who you met before digging his hole through the plaster during a thunderstorm with some pharmaceutical assistance. But, all right. Watching another dog react and now mirroring that behaviour. What training can you put in place? Does this person feel like talking me through that? Yeah. I'll repeat this in a second.
So it's a border collie.
Uh-huh.
And we get together on a day at the beach and do that.
Yep.
The other border collie that she's also related to starts barking at push bikes and things, go past skateboards and everything.
Yep.
So my border collie sits there and goes, watches that border collie, and as soon as it starts reacting, she starts barking at.
And never did prior.
Didn't do any. It doesn't, even when I walk my dog without it, no, couldn't give it a hoot about.
Yeah, okay.
That other dog's reactions to being on alert. Oh, there's a bike.
Yep. So the question is about a dog that's essentially reacting to another dog who is reacting to push bikes, skateboards, scooters. And so that's how I would think about that, right? I would think about your dog is not necessarily mirroring that behaviour and her behaviour based on the fact that you can take her for a walk an hour later and no reaction to the skateboards. It's all about that dog. And I would, by watching how she does that, what you describe, and particularly the body language, what I'd be interested in is thinking about, is she upset or is she just excited? Yeah. And so then I would be, distance will probably help. I mean, if that's it, this is a problem for you. If you don't care, let it roll. But, yeah, creating distance to the point where she can see that, cope without reacting and escalating in that way, and then reinforcing her for doing it. Yeah, for sure. And I apologise. I've been talking about reinforcement and I've been talking about treats, but reinforcer is anything that makes a behaviour happen more. And so treats are kind of the most commonly spoken about, and they're really good and they're really useful. But toys and play, and particularly for working breed dogs, are really good. And even then, thinking about functional reinforcers. The dog that wants to get to something or away from something, we can use that as a reinforcer. We can teach the dog, if she were barking because she wants to get to that dog, if we thought that were the case, we can, the dogs, I think, that are kind of leash reactive because they're frustrated, sometimes the best way forward is to get them to settle, and then if it's safe, getting in quick and letting them, and the reinforcer can be that social interaction. If that dog's super social and frustrated by the inability to meet that other dog, we can use that social interaction as the reinforcement. Nuisance barking. We're at the right talk. Barking at dusk, anything will set him off. I think it's interesting that a lot of dogs are probably more reactive at these times, and I wonder whether it's just that there's more happening in the neighbourhood. I think thinking about triggers and a concept of trigger stacking, if there are things that agitate or annoy or even just pique your alertness, and then they're all happening, if you've got better hearing than we do, and all of the neighbours are driving home and their garage doors are going up and down and the kids are playing in the pool and all of these things are happening, then we're getting this kind of sensory overload, and at some point we tip the scales and we're over that threshold and we're barking. And it may be, and this can be confusing, it may be a case that, hey, now you're barking at a thing that you normally wouldn't bark at, so I don't understand why you're barking this time but not last time. It can be a sum effect of what's happening in that moment. And so I would say for this doggo, barking at dusk, anything will set him off. And I think Kylie mentioned to me there was talk about running out through the doggy door and barking in the yard. I would be, if there's a peak time of night, I would be cutting that access to the yard just for that period. And that's the management. And then, you could allow it if you're up and about later and the neighbourhood's quiet. Potentially you could let that happen. Yes, sir.
what I've got is like 2 beagle pups.
2 beagle pups. Winner.
One of them, which is the one that they sleep in the laundry. We've got the dog door, on
Yep.
the door, the glass door. They go in and out during the day, perfect. Night time, if they see or think they see anything in the backyard, out they go. One of them just
Yeah, okay. So that's that they're in the laundry as their bedroom and they have access in and out through a doggy door, and through the day it's no problem, but at night time if they go out, one of them will bark. My guess is that for that to be different, there will be a contextual difference, that they've seen something of an evening. You know, there's been a cat on the fence, there's been a possum on the fence, and that individual is all about that. So again, management, I would be, you know, the simple but maybe non-practical is for a period, you know, closing that door when it's doable. Okay. And then they bark from inside. Yeah, okay. Wondering about then, okay, if it's things they see, you know, can we block that line of sight? Talking about visual blocking. If it's things they hear, getting a little radio in that same room, playing even white noise. There are some studies about calming music. The takeaway from me was like anything that you'd expect while you're getting a massage actually has a physiological effect on dogs. So, you know, solo piano music, things like that. But I think white noise can be really good. If you've got noise, and the great thing is they're in the laundry, they're not in your bedroom, so you can have that white noise on a bit. You won't hear it, the neighbours won't hear it, but they won't hear what's happening out there. So I think that would be good. And then long game, my work into the problem would probably be putting that one on a lead and doing some excursions into the yard, quiet, and rewarding that. And trying to desensitize, so finding a way to alter that threshold and alter that environment so we can go approximate, you know, you run out into the backyard and you bark, cool, now we're going out into the backyard and you're not barking, good boy. Does that make sense? Yeah, I'm all about practical, right? Rather than getting up at 10 p.m. to walk out into the backyard. Barking when on leash at some dogs, usually big dogs, ones he hasn't met, i.e. staffies and shepherds. Yeah. So I think often these things, when there's a clear delineation, like little dogs are okay, the fluffy things are okay, sometimes it's even like, I don't like German shepherds. I think that probably means, going back to that list of things, when we come to emotion, I think that probably means, and I keep saying probably because none of my patients have ever told me how they feel, that they don't feel good. You know, they've had a negative experience with that dog and so they feel uncomfortable. An analogy I'm happy to use, I don't think this will get me in any trouble, is if I walk into a pub and 6 blokes walk in with full face tattoos and leather vests with big patches on the back, I'm going to feel a little bit uncomfortable. You know, if 6 blokes walk in wearing rugby jerseys because the Tri Nations has just been on, different feeling. You know, if you know, 6 guys walk in and they're wearing, I don't know, clown suits, different story again. And so I think, you know, associations make a big difference. And so I think there's a lot of those dogs that are walking around having a great time and then they go, ooh, I don't like that. And there's a common misconception, again, we'll talk about these emotive things next week, but because we're pulling forward, I'm not scared. And I think when we think back to learning history, those of you that came to the previous talk, when we have a negative emotion, we generally have 4 main behavioural responses. The big 2 are fight and flight. We often take flight away, right? Our dogs are in our house, they're in a room, they're in the car, they're in the vet clinic, or they're on a lead, a 1 metre piece of rope tied to their human anchor. 1 metre doesn't count as flight. If you're scared of that thing and you're there and you move to there, you're still scared of that thing. And so I think what happens is our dogs spend their life going, scary, run away, didn't work, still scary. And eventually they go, how about this? Ba, 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 ba. And either that dog disappears, or the person with the dog disappears, or we go, oh my God, that's so embarrassing, and we run away. And the aggression that's motivation was to create distance, check. So it goes, oh, I just spent 12 months trying to hide and then pull away and then roll over and wee my pants and all of these things that did nothing about that other dog. And the first time I carried on like this, it went, maybe I'll try it next time. And then it happens again, and then it happens again. And so we end up with this dog that goes, cool, I still don't like that dog, but I can control the narrative here. So I'm coming at you, And so we get these dogs that look forward and they think they're tough. And that's often where the story comes, oh yeah, your 3 kilo teacup chihuahua thinks it's the alpha. It's like, your 3 kilo teacup chihuahua is petrified, but it just knows that this has been the most successful behavioural expression to date to deal with that specific scenario. And so I would then find, we're talking about threshold, and in some of these scenarios, it can be as simple as distance. So I take my chihuahua and here's the walking track, and I come and I hide up over here and we sit and we watch the dogs walk past. I find a distance at which he or she can watch these dogs come past and remain comfortable. Be aware. I need them to know, because otherwise it doesn't count, but be aware and remain comfortable. And then I reward them for being comfortable. And I use treats, or I use toys, or I use some kind of reinforcer, praise, pats, whatever floats their boat, to make them feel good in that moment. And we can imprint, talking about classical conditioning, that pleasant feeling that we're creating onto the presence of other dogs. And over time, we can bring that in. I might walk 30 metres, 50 metres to start with, but slowly I come in and we're protecting that dog. It's not being traumatised. But yeah, truly I think those dogs that have that breed or colour or size specificity, I think it's less about where I started, like, hey, I just want to get in for a play. And I think it's more like, I'm not sure here.
What if it's a territorial thing? Like it only happens in the local area. Mm-hmm. So like we have a little Maltese Shih Tzu and she will bark, definitely at big dogs, but even sometimes at small dogs, but only within her local area she perceives that. If we take her anywhere else, no issues. Could be a massive dog, no problem.
And is she social out?
With some dogs that she likes, yeah, she'll definitely be social.
Yeah, okay.
But like, other dogs, even like when it's not her area, she's normally either friendly with other dogs or completely indifferent. She never barks.
Yep.
But if it's a local area...
Sure. So the question is, for those up the back, a little Malteser that close to home will sometimes react on lead and bark a lot. Outside that kind of local precinct, never does that. Is sometimes social, sometimes kind of doesn't care but doesn't bark. I would be... Listen, this is an assumption, right? Again, you ask her, tell me if she tells you, but I would be surprised if her territory, for her, extended that far. Not because a dog in the wild can't have quite a big territory, but because she spends so little time in that neighbourhood, right? I think if you said to me, how it happens in our yard and that's it, maybe. I think more it's going to be you spent more time in that local area, and so her learning history is different to when she goes somewhere different. So she goes somewhere new and it's a completely new experience, so we get new behaviours. So that could be a great desensitization tool where we go, hey, I really don't like you barking. You never bark when we walk here. So and now this is when you're like, that's really difficult and you're a pain in my butt. For the next month, I'm going to drive you over here and we're going to walk, and you're not going to bark because you don't, and I'm going to reward you for not barking. And then gradually, to bring it back home, we drive less and less distance, right? So you might drive 5K, go for a walk, and then by the end you drive 1K and you could like walk home, but we're bringing those skills back. So whatever we can do, whatever we can change that then manifests as behavior that we like, roll with it. You know, like part of this is, I was talking to someone before about some of these cases are quirky, right? We will never know why that's different, but use it. These are the things we know, and I can take that specific piece of information and go, cool, here's a training plan where we're going to walk, not bark, reinforce. And it will be a pain because you've got to drive to go for a walk, but what have you got for me?
I've got two dogs, a 12-year-old and a 4-year-old dog. And the 4-year-old's very anxious, like an anxious dog, and when we go walking on a lead, he will bark at any dog. But he gets into such a state that you can't even talk to him. He gets like in the zone that you just feel his eyes look.
Yep.
At home he's really good. We've managed to control the barking at home, but he's very reactive. He'll suddenly just bark for no reason.
Yep.
Control at home. As soon as we go out, he does full on the lead, but then I've got the two dogs, and then the other one will start. And then anyone coming near you thinks he's an aggressive dog because he's barking, but he's the most softest dog ever.
Yep.
But they think they're aggressive because he's barking.
Yep.
Even in close thing, any dog walking past him will bark at them.
Yeah. So we're talking about a little guy that's outside of the house is a bit anxious and does a lot of barking. Yeah. And so I think that little guy's got a lot going on. And I would guess that he is overwhelmed. I think that's a really great word. And so truly the hard part is taking the theoretical and making it practical. So often in those scenarios when it's truly dog related, if people are up for it, I will have them travel for a dog walk, but instead of just getting outside of an area, find somewhere where you can walk where there aren't any other dogs. And at risk of blowing all of my clients' walking places, on the weekend, industrial estates are really good. Sometimes sporting fields at particular times can be good because even though there may be dogs around, you've got a good line of sight. You're not going to come around the corner in the suburb and boom, there's someone on you. It sounds like he's overwhelmed. He's got a lot going on. I would be trying to take baby steps with him. These are the management things, in the neighborhood. This would be the management strategy. If it's not possible, then maybe he can't progress, right? So maybe then taking him out of the neighborhood helps. There's lots of moving parts, and sometimes it's a case of working with him, having someone come out that makes it fun and goes, cool, let's see how we are in the kitchen, in the backyard, in the front yard. Let's move out and see, can we get around the block? What can we make safe for him? And then slowly expand from there. Do you pass your emotions to your dog? That's a great question. So I think dogs are exceptionally in tune with us, and I think they're excellent at reading our body language, our facial expressions, our behaviour. No doubt they smell things that are associated with adrenaline and our hormones and things like that. Do we pass them on? I don't think so. But can our emotions influence the emotions of our dogs? For sure. I mean, you stub your toe and you start screaming profanities and your dog's probably not sitting there wagging its tail. Or if it is, you've done a really good job of conditioning it that you don't mean business. Or, you take one of those phone, and I will say I'm guilty, you take one of those phone calls, because someone at the bank screwed something up and you get a bit grumpy and the dogs are like, what's wrong with you? So I think they get it. I think it affects them. Do we pass them on? I don't think so. I think there's, I've had some people come into me in tears like, I've got anxiety, I've got depression, and I think I've done this to, no, that's not how it works. But I think if we're constantly nervous, I think this goes both ways, right? I've got the reactive dog, I'm out on a walk and I've got my head on a swivel, and now I'm tense, and now the dog that was already kind of tense knows that I'm tense, and we're kind of bouncing back and forward. So, yes and no, does that help? I don't think our emotions directly imprint onto them, but I think our emotion and behaviour absolutely affected we're part of their environment, and we're part of their environment that we can change. Electric scooters on the footpath, reacting and to grab them. And now Kylie asked me to touch on this one because what we don't want are dogs grabbing people on electric scooters. While I have my own personal thoughts about electric scooters, we're not going to use our dogs to implement those change. I think electric scooters, if you're a dog that doesn't understand lithium-ion batteries and the latest trends, I think they're pretty scary because all of a sudden there are people that are moving really quickly, really quietly in strange ways. They come out of nowhere. Some of them will even have traumatic experiences where, they've knocked into something, they've run over something. So I think they can be innately quite scary, and I think we're all lucky that our dogs don't react. So the ones that do, when we can, I want to create enough distance that they're comfy. So I would not be walking those dogs generally on busy thoroughfares. I wouldn't be going down to Burleigh Esplanade for a walk on a Sunday morning because we're going to encounter electric scooters. It's going to be a problem. What I would do, in the interest of actively trying to desensitize that, same concept as me and my 3-kilo Chihuahua before, except instead of dogs, I'm setting up off a track where I know there are going to be scooters, because if there aren't scooters, I'm wasting my time. Well, I'm not. I'm hanging out with my dog. That's not bad. But every time I see a scooter, I'm going to try to make the dog feel good. Treats, praise, toy, whatever it is, and then potentially ask it to do something. If we want to engage that operant component. Hey, scooter, good girl, come with me. And we walk away and we hide behind the bus stop, and then we sneak back over and we go again. And we see the next scooter come, and little Frou-Frou sees the scooter and we go, good job, Frou-Frou, come on. And away we go. And so over time, the goal there is, in that scenario, is two things. One, again, we can imprint that positive emotion where we go, holy crap, every time I see a scooter now, because you're managing it and there are no scary interactions where I almost get run over because I'm 3 kilos and I'm only as big as the tyres, no bad experiences, all good experiences, because every time it happens, you give me a treat. And we were talking about treats before, and I was saying, these treats, when we're talking about classical conditioning and training, these treats should be good stuff, right? And if your dog's not eating, try better. And if they are eating, try better. We're trying to reinforce them, right? This is work hard. Someone trying to think about reinforcers. I know beer, right? So I'm going to talk about beer. If my wife says to me, if you do good, I'll give you a stubby of VB. I'm like, oh, you can keep it. That's what I grew up drinking that. My tastes have changed. But, so reinforcers matter and there's value. And so, what we're trying to do is imprint that positive emotional association, but also then we can teach something new that's like, hey, You don't like those scooters, and every time we see one, we're going to move away again. So we get that double whammy. That's a reinforcer of itself. Thresholds. How do you know the threshold of the behaviour to help desensitize excited barking as the problem? So I would say the distance I want is where the barking doesn't happen. So I need that animal. And this comes down to, the reason we do this is not magical woo. It's based in scientific knowledge that if often we talk about stress as a bad thing. Stress is a thing. And we need some level of stress, otherwise we're all in a coma. And if we're not alert enough, we don't learn. You know, if you are nodding off because it's a bit warm in here and I lost you at the slide about digging holes. You know, if you're not alert enough, you're not learning. If you're too stressed, you're not learning. And the reason for that is when cortisol levels get above a certain level, they switch off proteins in the brain that are associated with consolidation of memory. So memory, as much as this sounds crazy, all of the things we remember are proteins in neurons and changes in the synapses that join neurons together. And that process doesn't happen without this specific enzyme that gets shut down by excessive cortisol. So when I run my Chihuahua all the way into the path and the scooter comes past, I get this flash of adrenaline and cortisol, and my ability to learn in that moment is gone. And the learning that will take place is learning in the amygdala that's associated with fear response. So future threat, I will learn, yeah, I was right, that scooter was scary and I almost died. I need to do something about it. We need to back up to the point where we're alert and we're focused and we're aware of that scooter, but I can stop and I can take a breath and I can think and I can engage with you. And so I would say as a yardstick there, not barking, not bouncing around, maybe able to engage in something that the dog knows. So, you know, I talked about conditioning cues. You could use something simple like a sit. So I could take my Chihuahua, see the scooter, ask her to sit, and if she can't, it's because she, in that moment, is not comfortable doing it. So I go further back. You know, can you do something I know you're capable of doing? No, 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 yes, boom. Same thing with food. I know you're a pig, you love your food, why are you not eating right now? Because you're not comfortable. So there's some things, the specific behaviour, the body tension, the level of arousal and bouncing around, all of those things we want to dial down to that sweet spot where we know it's happening, but we can stop and think and engage, and that means we can learn.